In this video, I'm going to explain how I created a successful app called Fudget and how I increased its revenue to the point where I was able to quit my developer job in August 2017. So back in 2011, I was working as a full-time developer here in Manchester, and I was mostly doing front-end using HTML, CSS, JavaScript and jQuery, and also some back-end using PHP and WordPress. And at some point, a guy I was working with called Andy told me about a new framework called Cordova, although I think it was just called PhoneGap at the time, which allowed you to create apps for the iOS and Android app stores using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. And I loved the idea of being able to create an app using the skills I already had, and I couldn't wait to get started. So I bought a book about PhoneGap, I think it was the only book available at the time, called Building iPhone Apps with HTML, CSS and JavaScript. And I read that book cover to cover and got started on my first app. So I needed an idea for an app, and at this time I was cycling quite a lot all over town, and Google Maps wasn't too hot back then, and I wanted to be able to figure out how long it would take me to cycle to different places so that I could make sure I could get to places on time, and also to be able to figure out my average speed on different journeys. So this gave me the idea to create an app for calculating speed, distance or time, where you could, for example, calculate the average speed of a journey by entering the distance and time, or calculate the time of a journey by entering the speed and distance. And I thought there could be many different use cases for this: cyclists, truck drivers, taxi drivers, even scientists. So the idea for my first app, Speed Distance Time Calculator, was born. And since I only had an iOS phone, I wanted to create an iOS app. Unfortunately, I quickly found out that you need to have a Mac to develop iOS apps, and I didn't have a Mac. However, my partner did have a Mac that her employers gave her for work, but the problem was it was about 10 years old and unbelievably slow and only barely possible to work on. So I did most of my work on my Windows PC in a web browser, building the app with HTML, CSS and jQuery, and I just used the ancient Mac whenever I needed to get the app onto a real device. And it took me about 3 months to create the app, working every evening. So I would work my day job and get home, have some dinner and then get back to work on the app for a few hours. And despite the limitations of the 10-year-old Mac that I was using, I managed to publish Speed Distance Time Calculator to the iOS App Store in July 2011. So I published Speed Distance Time Calculator in July 2011. And the next day, I kept refreshing the stats page over and over again because I couldn't wait to see my revenue stats for the first day. And I was amazed to find that I'd made over £4 on the first day. And then on the second day, I made over £7. Well, after that, it settled down to around £2 a day. And I was pretty happy. I mean, yeah, I wasn't going to be buying a Ferrari or anything, but I was making enough to pay for my lunch every day without really doing anything. And also, it was a pretty simple app, which was not likely to require much maintenance. So it was basically a nice little bit of passive income. And I thought maybe I could increase this revenue a bit if I improved the app and add some new features and give it a new design. However, the 10-year-old Mac that I was using was really getting in my way. I really needed a shiny new Mac. Around this time, a front-ender called Daz that I was working with told me that he was thinking of taking part in a competition called CSS Off. And in this competition, entrants would be given a Photoshop design of a web page and were given 2 weeks to build the web page. And it would be judged on various different aspects like code cleanliness, semantics, validation, how much it matched up to the design, browser support and optimization techniques. And it would be judged by various industry figureheads, including Chris Coyier, the creator of CSS Tricks and CodePen, and Ethan Marcoux, the web pioneer who first coined the phrase responsive design. And the top prize was a shiny new MacBook Air, which was exactly what I needed. So I thought I might as well give it a go, and I signed up. And as soon as I received the design, I spent every possible moment working on my entry and only slept for a couple of hours a night. And at the end of that intense 2 weeks, I submitted my entry and found out that over 400 people had taken part. And with all those people taking part, I was certain that I wouldn't win or even be a runner-up. But a few months later, I received an email telling me that I'd won the competition, which was just unbelievable. And shortly after, I received exactly what I needed, a shiny new MacBook Air. So with my new Mac in tow, I set about improving Speed Distance Time Calculator. And it was looking pretty gross at this point. And with the help of an amazing designer that I was working with, I completely redesigned the icon, the app, and all of the screenshots. And I also added some cool new features such as a stopwatch and tons of new speed and distance units. But despite all of these efforts, I was never able to generate more than a few pounds a day from this app. And I was feeling quite disheartened. I figured out that in order to quit my job, I would need about 50 apps like this, and I would never have time to create that many apps. So at this point, which was a big mistake, I just slowly walked away from working on apps with my tail between my legs and just enjoyed the few pounds that I was making each day. So for the next year or so, I didn't really do anything outside of my job. I just quietly fell into a bit of a comfort zone. So I went to my job, enjoyed paying for my lunch with my app revenue, occasionally fixed bugs in the app, but I never really worked on any other apps or side projects. And after about a year, I realized I was starting to feel pretty depressed. I was bored of doing the same kind of work every day, basically just turning a PSD into a HTML and CSS template, adding a little bit of jQuery to add the same carousels, the same pop-ups, load in some dynamic content in the same way. And also the place where I was working, which had previously been a really fun place to work, had started to develop a really negative culture, and it was all just getting me a bit down, and something needed to change. At some point in 2013, when I was trying to figure out why I was feeling so down, I stumbled into a video on YouTube called The Strangest Secret. And this is kind of a motivational video from the 1950s. It's really dated and old-fashioned, but for some reason it really struck a chord with me. And it made me realize the importance of always having a goal to work towards. It made me think back to the time when I was working on my first app, and also the time when I was working on the CSS Off Competition. It made me realize that even though doing those things was really hard and I was working my butt off and it was kind of painful, that those were the times when I was actually happiest. I kind of realized that to be okay, I need to always be working towards some kind of big goal, and I always need to be creating something that's mine. So I decided to get my butt back into gear and create something new. And I set a very specific goal for myself, that in 2 years' time, I would be making £100 per day from apps and that I would quit my job. I needed a good idea for a new app, something with broader appeal than Speed Distance Time Calculator, that could be used by many different people, the kind of app that once you start using it, you can't live without it. And for several years, I'd been using an Excel spreadsheet to work out how much spending money I had to play with each month. And this spreadsheet was basically just a list of income items and expense items. So I'd throw in my salary and my app revenue as income items for the month, and then I'd throw in all of my expenses for the month. So rent, car, mobile phone, savings, etc. And I would display the overall balance of all these income and expense items at the bottom of the spreadsheet. And whatever that number was would be my spending money for the month. So I would take that money out in cash and I would only spend this money. And this way I never got into financial trouble. And at some point I realized it was silly to still be using Excel for this in the era of smartphones and apps. I thought there must be an app for this. So I spent weeks on the App Store trying to find an app which would do this simple task of just adding up a bunch of income and expense items and giving you the balance. But I couldn't find anything. I downloaded countless budgeting apps, but none of them had the ability to perform this simple function. They were all just quite complicated and difficult to learn. Even as a technical person, I couldn't figure out how to use some of these apps at all. And I would read the reviews for these apps, and I found other people complaining about how difficult to use they were. And this made me realize that it wasn't just me who was desperate for a simple budgeting app, something that anyone can just pick up and start using without any learning curve. And so the idea for Fudget was born, a kind of mobile spreadsheet with a simple list of income and expense items with the balance displayed at the bottom. And if you've enjoyed this video so far, do me a favor and smash the like button, and also leave a comment, let me know if you want to see more videos like this where I'm just talking about stuff. So Fudget was a lot more complicated than Speed Distance Time Calculator because it had data. And I created it using HTML, CSS, and jQuery, and I used WebSQL for storing the data on the user's device. And using WebSQL was a huge mistake, by the way. I should have used IndexedDB because WebSQL caused me tons of problems, but I won't get into that now. And I still had a full-time job at this point, and I had a baby in the house, and I was tired, and it was a real struggle to keep going with it and to get the work done. And so to help me keep going, I started using the Pomodoro technique, where you set a timer for 25 minutes, work exclusively on one thing, and then take a 5-minute break, and then move on to the next 25-minute Pomodoro. And I made it kind of like a game to see how many Pomodoros I could fit into the day for Fudget. And I still had a full-time job, so there was only so many I could do. But I'd get up really early and do 1 or 2 Pomodoros in the morning, and then I'd go to my day job and work my day job for the morning. Then I'd do 1 or 2 Pomodoros during my lunch break, and then I'd do maybe 4 more in the evening as well after dinner. So I could sometimes get 8 or more Pomodoros done in a day. So I had to make quite a lot of sacrifices to get all of these Pomodoros done. I basically stopped hanging around with people at work. I gave up my lunch break. I gave up TV and playing guitar in the evening. But after 6 months, I finally published Fudget to the iOS App Store as a paid app in July 2014. And I couldn't wait to see what was going to happen. And nothing happened. Hardly anybody bought the app. It didn't even do as well as Speed Distance Time Calculator, and it seemed like a total failure and a total waste of time. However, the people that did buy the app left great reviews and praised it for how simple it was. And I still believed in the app, and I was using it every day, and I'd kind of become dependent on it. So I decided to change Fudget from a paid app to a free app with no monetization whatsoever to see if I could build up a user base and maybe figure out how to make some money from it later on. And so for the rest of 2014, Fudget made no money, but slowly built up a user base and got more and more positive reviews on the App Store. And almost a whole year after the app was released, I added an in-app purchase, a pro upgrade which offered extra features like a calculator, an export feature, and a bunch of different color themes. And because of this in-app purchase, by the end of 2015, Fudget was making around £10 a day. Around this time, I got a new day job as a hybrid app developer. So I was creating cross-platform apps using Ionic for the charity sector. So this was a much better job, which was much more relevant to what I was trying to achieve with my side hustle, and gave me a lot of new and relevant skills. And it was also here that I started to learn Vue.js as well. And after a while, the company allowed me to drop a day and only work 4 days a week, which gave me a whole day to myself each week. And at this point, I had small children in the house and couldn't really work at home. So on that day off, I would take my laptop to Manchester Library and spend the whole day working on Fudget, which massively helped to speed things up. In early 2016, I took the next step and added some ads to Fudget. Just some Google AdMob banner ads which are displayed along the bottom of the app and could be removed by purchasing the Pro upgrade. And it only took me about 2 hours to implement these ads. And this immediately added around £20 of revenue per day. And to this day, this is still my favorite 2 hours work because since doing that 2 hours work, I've barely touched those ads and they've been making anywhere from £20 to £50 per day, every day, ever since. And so at this point, I was about a third of the way to my goal of £100 a day, but I still needed more. So I decided to create an Android version of Fudget and then a Mac version and then a Windows version. And adding these platforms added about another £30 or £40 a day to my revenue. But I still wasn't quite making enough to pay the bills and quit my job. So after reading tons of books and watching tons of videos about apps, entrepreneurship, and business in general, I also did a bunch of other things, such as listening to my users and adding new features that they wanted. So I kept a spreadsheet of all of the feature requests from users, and I kept a count of how many times each feature was requested. And this enabled me to easily see which features most people wanted. And one of the most requested features was data sync across devices. So I added a Dropbox data sync feature for Pro users. And this massively increased the number of in-app purchases being bought since that feature was so in demand. And I also worked on App Store optimization, or ASO, which means getting Fudget to rank in search results for popular phrases such as budget, budget planner, money tracker, etc., using tools such as Sensor Tower and Mobile Action, and also just using a ton of trial and error, playing around with Fudget's title, subtitle, keywords and description fields on the App Store listing pages. And I also massively improved the icon, changing it from a really ugly pig icon to this beautiful coin style design, which was designed by an amazing web designer called Pete that I was working with. So thanks, Pete. I also massively improved my screenshots in the App Store, and on those screenshots I focused on social proof instead of focusing on features, which is what I was doing with my previous screenshots. And I also got Fudget featured on Apps Gone Free, which is both an app and a website which features a number of apps every day which are temporarily free or have in-app purchases which are temporarily free. And this led to tens of thousands of downloads. And even after the offer was over, I still continued to get way more downloads than before. So I kept on working on all of these different things, trying things, analyzing the results, tweaking things, and the revenue slowly kept increasing until finally in April 2017, I'd finally reached my goal of £100 a day. For the next few months, I saved all of the money that Fudget was making. I wanted to have enough money saved up to cover 3 months worth of expenses when I quit my job, so that if everything went wrong, I wouldn't need to go straight back to a job, and I'd have a little bit of time to get things going again. And all of this time, Fudget's revenue kept increasing, and in July 2017, I handed in my notice, and in August 2017, I worked my last day in my job, and I haven't had a job since. And since then, I've just been creating my own apps, creating YouTube videos, and creating courses. So I'm going to tell you the 10 main keys that I believe led to Fudget's success. And I'm going to elaborate on each of these points in a future video called How to Create a Successful App in 10 Steps. So make sure you subscribe and click the bell if you don't want to miss that. And when that video is out, I'll link to it at the end of this video. But in a nutshell, here are the 10 key things I did that made Fudget successful. Number 1. I created an app that met a demand. So I could tell by looking at all of these complicated budget apps and all of the reviews complaining about this complexity that there was a real demand for something simple like Fudget. And I also knew that Fudget would be an app that I would use every day myself and become dependent on. So I was able to tell that there was a demand for this app before I even started working on it. And number 2 is I asked for reviews and feedback. So getting good reviews for your app is absolutely critical. The more positive reviews you get, the higher your app will be in search results, the more social proof you'll have, and the more downloads you'll get. And getting feedback from your users is also critical so that you can figure out what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. So I would ask users for feedback inside the app. And number 3 is I listen to my users. So like I said, I would ask users for feedback within the app, and I would keep a spreadsheet of all of the feature requests, and I would keep a count of exactly how many times each feature was requested so that I would know exactly what features were most in demand and add those in-demand features to the app. And number 4 is I used the freemium model. So as a paid app, Fudget was just never going to work. So making it a free app with in-app purchases was absolutely critical to its success. And number 5 is I displayed ads with AdMob. So adding ads to the app increased the revenue by around £20 to £30 a day from only a couple of hours work. So this was absolutely key to its success. And number 6 is I covered multiple platforms. Although most of Fudget's revenue came from and still comes from the iOS version, I needed all of the other platforms, Android, Mac and Windows, to boost the revenue to where it needed to be. And you never know which platform your app is going to be most successful on. Some apps are more successful on iOS and some apps are more successful on Android. So you really want to cover as many different platforms as possible. And number 7 is I learned and implemented App Store optimization. So learning the fundamentals of ASO, App Store optimization, was critical and enabled me to get Fudget to rank for tons of keywords that people were searching for, leading to hundreds of more daily downloads. And number 8 is I optimized the icon and screenshots. So I believe having a beautiful icon, the kind of icon that people are happy to have on their home screen, and not buried in some folder is critical, because nobody wants an ugly pig icon on their home screen. And also creating beautiful screenshots that focus on social proof and the benefits of the app instead of focusing on features led to hundreds more downloads. People are generally more concerned that something is being used and valued by other people than they are concerned about a specific list of features. And number 9 is I got the app featured on Apps Gone Free. So I got Fudget featured on Apps Gone Free several times by giving away the in-app purchase for free for a day, and every time this led to tens of thousands of downloads, increased search visibility, and increased ongoing downloads over time. And number 10 was I created an email list. So I created an email list for Fudget and encouraged people to join inside the app, and this has led to a list of thousands of people. And I've been able to use this list for many different things, such as putting out surveys and getting critical feedback about how to improve the app. I've used it to employ beta testers for pre-release versions of Fudget. I've used it to promote other apps that I've created. And when Fudget 2 is released, hopefully later this year, I'll be able to use this list to hopefully get thousands of people who know, like, and trust the app to download the new app straight away, which will massively help to give Fudget 2 some initial traction. So here's 3 things that I would have done differently. Number 1, I would have saved more money before I quit my job. So before I quit my job, I saved up enough money to cover around 3 months worth of expenses. But what happened was, right after I handed in my notice, my revenue started to drop, and I ended up spending all of that money in the first few months after quitting my job. And it was a very hairy time where I came very close to having to get a job again. But fortunately, I was able to turn things around using many of the strategies that I mentioned earlier. But by then, all of that money was gone. So I would recommend saving up a lot more money before you quit your job, at least enough to cover 6 months worth of expenses, but ideally around 12 months worth. And number 2, I would have iterated more quickly. So I spent a lot of time sitting around between making big changes on Fudget, and if I could do it again, I would have been much quicker at making a change, analyzing the results, and then moving on to the next change, and so on. I also would have been much quicker at reading books, watching videos, and just learning all the things that I needed to learn. And if I had moved more quickly, I probably could have quit my job 1 or 2 years after creating Fudget, instead of the 3 years that it actually took me in the end. And number 3 is I would have set a goal sooner. So it was only when I set that clear goal, the goal to make £100 per day from apps, that things really started to move forward for me. And once you set a clear goal, it's always there in the back of your mind, and you become hyper aware to any ideas or information that can help you move towards that goal. And you also become hyper avoidant of anything or anyone that's going to get in your way of reaching that goal. So if I could go back, I would have set that goal much earlier. So if you want to quit your job with an apps business or some other kind of side business, here's how to do it the right way in 5 steps. So number 1, write down your goal. Figure out exactly what your goal is, what you're going to do, how much money you're going to make, and when you're going to achieve that by. And write it down and think about it all the time. Number 2, create something that there's a demand for. Just because you think it's a great idea and your Uncle Steve thinks it's a great idea doesn't mean that there's a demand for it in the real world. So make sure you're creating something that there's a real demand for, that's going to solve the real problems of real people. Number 3, save as much money as you can. When you finally quit your job, you should have enough money in the bank to cover your expenses for at least 6 months, but preferably a year, so that if it all goes wrong, you never need to go back to a job again. Number 4, work on your side business as much as you can. Get up early, work in the morning, work during your lunch break, work in the evenings, work at the weekend if you have to, and give up whatever you need to give up to make this happen, whether that's socializing, Netflix, video games, or whatever. And number 5, leave on good terms. So once your side business is making enough to pay your bills, and once you have enough money in the bank to cover your expenses for 6 to 12 months, hand in your notice and leave on good terms, and never go back to a job again. I hope you found this video useful, and I wish you the best of luck with your app or side hustle, whatever that is. And make sure you check out this follow-up video, how to create a successful app in 10 steps. which will be up there if it's out, and if not, make sure you hover over my face over there and click subscribe so you don't miss that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.